I knew something was wrong the moment my daughter looked at me with those wide, frozen eyes, the kind a child makes when they've seen something no child should ever see. And as I sat down at the kitchen table with my broken arm throbbing like a drum inside my skin, she whispered, "Mom, Dad said this would teach you a lesson." And the room went so quiet I could hear the humming of the old refrigerator, the rustle of dust near the window, and the soft tremble of my own breath as I tried not to cry in front of her because even with pain burning through my bones, I didn't want her to see me afraid. But fear was all I had left. Fear and the sickening echo of the door slamming behind my husband just 10 minutes earlier. Friends, before we start this story, I want to ask you a small favor. If what you hear resonates with your heart, please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. And in the comments, let me know what city or state you're listening from. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France. I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. The pain made my vision fuzzy at the edges, turning the kitchen lights into blurry halos as little Aria stood beside me, her tiny fingers hovering like she wanted to touch me but was too scared to, and I remembered the last sound I heard before the bone snapped, a crack like someone breaking dry firewood, and then his voice, cold and low, saying I needed to learn respect, as if respect could be carved into a woman's body like a punishment. But I didn't scream then. I wouldn't give him that. And maybe that was what made him angrier. Aria's breath stuttered as she climbed onto the chair beside me, and she looked so small in her faded sunflower pajamas that something inside me twisted harder than the pain in my arm, because she shouldn't have been awake. She shouldn't have been hiding under the stairs, watching everything. She shouldn't have been the one comforting me when I was supposed to be protecting her. Yet there she was, brushing her sleeve over her nose and whispering, "Mom, please don't fall asleep," like she thought I might slip away forever. I forced myself to sit up straighter, ignoring the way my vision wobbled, and I touched her cheek gently with my good hand, promising her in a shaky whisper that I wasn't going anywhere, even though I wasn't sure how much longer I could stay conscious. The kitchen around us felt like a trapped memory. Pale green cabinets my husband never allowed me to repaint, scuffed wooden floors he insisted were fine the way they are, and a forgotten cup of tea still steaming on the counter, the one I'd brewed just before everything exploded. The house always looked normal after he left, like nothing evil had ever touched it, but the air still held the echo of his temper, sharp and heavy, and Aria must have felt it too because she kept glancing toward the doorway as if expecting him to come back. I didn't know if he would return tonight or in the morning or next week, but I did know the thing he'd broken inside this family was bigger than my arm. And as Aria leaned against me, trembling like a leaf caught between wind and fear, I realized something inside me had shifted, something quiet but fierce, something that whispered that tonight had to be the last time he ever hurt us. I swallowed hard and tried to steady my voice as I told Aria to bring me the phone from the living room, but she hesitated, biting her lip the way she always did when she was scared of doing the wrong thing, and she whispered, "Dad said I can't touch it." And hearing that made my stomach clench because I knew exactly how he controlled her, with rules that sounded harmless until you realized they were meant to train obedience, not safety. I told her again, softer this time, that it was okay, that I needed her help, and she nodded and rushed away, her bare feet pattering across the floor. The moment she disappeared down the hallway, I let my head drop forward just for a second, letting the pain sweep through me like a tide because I needed to feel it fully before I pushed it away. The room spun, the edges warping like heat waves, and I pressed my good hand flat on the table to keep myself grounded, listening to the distant creak of the old farmhouse walls settling around us, the faint hoot of an owl outside, the whispering hush of late-night wind through the pine trees. This house had once been a dream, a place I imagined filling with laughter, family meals, and the smell of baked bread, but after 7 years with Halden, it had become something else entirely, a stage for quiet suffering, a place where I learned how to walk without making noise and speak without upsetting him. Aria returned, clutching the phone in both hands like it was something fragile, and she looked at me with eyes that begged me not to make everything worse. When she placed the phone on the table in front of me, I realized how much she'd grown without me noticing. her hair tangled from sleep, her cheeks flushed with worry, her eyes too wise for 6 years old, and something inside me cracked even deeper. I reached for the phone with my good hand, but before I could dial anyone, headlights swept across the kitchen window, cutting a bright slash of white across the floor, and Arya gasped, grabbing my sleeve as if light itself could hurt us. My heart slammed against my ribs. Halden never came back this fast. Not unless he forgot something. Not unless he had more to say. Not unless he wasn't done teaching lessons. The headlights paused, the engine rumbled, the wind outside stilled as if the earth itself held its breath. And just as Arya whispered, "Mom, is he back?" the engine revved, then cut off completely. The silence that followed was worse than the sound of the bones snapping, because silence meant he was out there, and silence meant he was coming. Arya clung to my sleeve as the front porch creaked under the weight of footsteps, slow, deliberate, the kind Halden made when he wanted the sound itself to speak for him, and my pulse hammered so loudly I could hardly hear anything else. But I forced myself upright because my daughter needed to see strength, not fear, even if that strength was stitched together with shaking bones and stubborn will. So I whispered for her to hide behind the pantry door and not come out until I called her, and she hesitated, tears pooling in her eyes until I whispered again, "Go," and finally she ran. Her little feet soft against the boards, disappearing into the shadows just as a heavy fist pounded once against the door. My first thought was run, my second was hide, but my third, stronger, deeper, fiercer, said enough, because fear had shaped too many years of my life already, and tonight I would not let it shape Arya's future too. The second knock came, louder this time, vibrating through the house like a warning, and I pushed myself up from the chair, breathing through the fire in my broken arm, trying not to let the dizziness swallow me. Footsteps shifted on the porch again, but then something unexpected happened. They moved away, not down the steps, not toward the driveway. They moved sideways, scraping across the wooden planks toward the window that looked into the kitchen, and suddenly Halden's shadow stretched across the wall, long and warped by the moonlight, and his voice, slurred with whiskey and fury, slithered through the cracks in the glass. "I know you're awake, Leora," he called, his tone dripping with the same cheap bravado he used whenever he tried to mask guilt with anger. "That stunt you pulled earlier, that was disrespect, and I'm not done correcting you yet." My stomach clenched. He was drunker than before, more unpredictable, more dangerous. I stepped back from the window, keeping my breathing steady, and I grabbed the phone with trembling fingers. But before I could dial 911, Halden kicked the side of the porch rail, the splintering crack echoing like gunfire through the quiet night. "You think you can hide?" he shouted. "You think breaking your arm means you get to play victim? No, you brought this on yourself. You made me look like the bad guy." I squeezed my eyes shut, the words hitting nerves I thought were numb long ago, and I remembered the beginning, years earlier, when Halden wasn't this monster, when he was charming in a dangerous sort of way, with his rough laughter and promises of a life full of excitement instead of loneliness. Back then, I was lonely in a way people don't talk about, the kind of loneliness that settles deep in the bones, and Halden knew how to spot it, exploit it, feed it. He came into my life like a flame into a cold room, warming everything at first, brightening everything, and I mistook that warmth for love. I mistook attention for devotion. I mistook his possessiveness for protection. The first time he raised his voice, he apologized for hours. The first time he shoved me, he blamed stress. The first time he slapped me, he cried harder than I did. And when he broke something, whether it was a glass or a promise, he always said the same thing: "I'll be better tomorrow." But tomorrow never came. Over the years, his temper grew like a storm cloud swallowing the sky, and once Arya was born, it tightened around the house like a fist. At first, he pretended to love her, but even babies know when love isn't safe, and Arya cried every time he walked into a room. That bothered him. A lot, too much. And the moment Arya became old enough to understand fear, Halden became bold enough to use mine against her, whispering rules about silence, obedience, respect, all the things that made him feel powerful. I should have left then, but leaving felt harder than staying because he watched everything, my phone, my keys, my bank account, and he always reminded me that the nearest neighbor was miles away and the sheriff was his cousin. And I believed him, because fear makes even lies feel true. A loud crash from the porch dragged me out of the memory. Holden had overturned the metal table outside, sending it clattering down the steps. "Open the door, Leora," he shouted. "Right now. Don't make this worse." His voice cracked on the last word, a tell that he was losing control, and that scared me more than his anger. I dialed 911 with my good hand, pressing the phone to my ear, praying the call went through despite the spotty service. And after a few agonizing seconds, a calm operator's voice answered, asking for my emergency. I whispered everything quickly but quietly, keeping my eyes on the window where his shadow drifted back and forth like a shark circling a trapped fish. The operator told me officers were on the way, but they were coming from town, and that meant at least 20 minutes. 20 minutes with Holden prowling outside like a storm waiting to break. I didn't have 20 minutes. Holden's shadow paused at the window. He pressed his hands to the glass and peered inside, his eyes glinting like dark coins in the moonlight. "You think I won't break this?" he snarled, tapping the glass with his fist. Tap, tap, harder taps, then a full slam that rattled the frame. Arya whimpered from the pantry, and the sound sliced through me like a blade. Holden heard it too. His lips curled into a slow, wicked smile. "She's awake," he said softly. "Good. She should see what happens when you disrespect me." Something snapped inside me harder than my bone had earlier. A final line, a final boundary. I stepped out from behind the table, meeting his gaze with a steadiness I didn't know I still had. He blinked, thrown off by my sudden stillness. Maybe he saw something different in my eyes, something new, something dangerous. Maybe he recognized the end of my fear. "Get away from the window," I said quietly. Firmly, every word balanced like a scalpel. Holden laughed, a loud, mocking, ugly sound, but he faltered when I didn't flinch. "Or what?" he sneered. "You gonna fight me with one arm?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because finally, I saw headlights again. But these weren't Holden's. They weren't slow. They weren't secretive. They barreled down the long dirt driveway, dust exploding behind them, red and blue lights flashing across the pines. Holden turned, stared, and for the first time tonight, he looked afraid. The flashing lights rolled across the yard like a rising tide, splashing red and blue over the pines, the porch, the broken rail Holden had kicked in. And for a split second, he looked like a man waking up from a bad dream, blinking at a reality he didn't think would ever come for him. But then the panic twisted his face into something ugly and familiar, and he spun toward the back of the house just as two deputies stepped out of their vehicles, hands on their belts, commanding him to stop, though everyone knew Holden never listened to anything but his own anger. I stayed still, the phone trembling in my hand, my broken arm pulsing with raw heat as I watched him sprint around the corner, his boots kicking up dust, and my heart hammered a sick rhythm against my ribs, because even with the deputies here, nothing about him felt finished or defeated. One of the officers, Deputy Lawrence, a tall man with a thick beard who had once come to the county fair with his daughter, ran after Holden, shouting for him to get on the ground, while the second deputy, a younger woman named Faye with eyes sharp as cold water, stepped toward me, asking if I was hurt, if anyone else was inside, if I had somewhere safe to sit. I nodded numbly, but before I could speak, Arya peeked out from behind the pantry door, her cheeks streaked with tears, her hair stuck to her forehead, and the moment she saw the uniform, she darted toward me, burying her face against my hip, trembling so hard I could feel it through my bones. Deputy Faye crouched to Arya's level, speaking softly, telling her she was safe now, but the word safe felt foreign, too big, too bright, something that didn't quite fit this house yet. Outside, the sounds grew louder, shouting, rustling, the clatter of feet on gravel, and then Holden's voice cut through the night like a rusted blade. "Don't touch me! Get off!" There was a scuffle, a grunt, the metallic snap of handcuffs, and then silence, except for Holden's ragged breathing. I wanted to look. I wanted proof he was no longer a threat. But part of me was terrified to see him restrained, not because I pitied him, but because the sight might break something inside me that had been holding me together for years. The illusion that if I kept the peace, if I stayed quiet, if I endured, things wouldn't escalate to this. But they had. And it was his doing, not mine. Deputy Lawrence returned a moment later, wiping sweat from his brow, and told me Holden was in custody, though he added the words carefully, like he knew how fragile safety can be when it's tethered to a man like Holden. "We'll get statements," he said, "and we'll get you medical attention. Your arm doesn't look good." It throbbed in agreement, but I didn't move toward the door until I whispered to Arya that we were stepping outside together, that she didn't have to let go of me, that she could hold as tight as she wanted. She clung to my waist as we walked out, her small hand gripping the fabric of my shirt like she feared the air might carry her away if she loosened her fingers. The cool night breeze brushed my face, sharp with the smell of pine and dust, and the world outside felt wider and emptier than it had minutes ago, the tension draining from the yard like a storm cloud finally breaking open. Halden sat on the ground near one of the patrol cars, his hands cuffed behind him, his face red and furious. But beneath that anger, I saw something else. Confusion, disbelief, as if he still expected someone to defend him, to say this was all a misunderstanding, to smooth the edges of his guilt the way I had done for too long. When he saw me, his expression shifted, the anger sharpening like a knife made for carving shame. "You did this," he snarled. "You always push things too far. I was trying to teach you respect." Deputy Lawrence stepped between us before I could answer, his stance firm and unshakable. But Halden wasn't talking to the deputy. He was talking to me the way he always had, through accusation, through twisting blame, through digging his claws into the parts of me he'd shaped into weakness. But something cold and heavy settled in my chest then, something that surprised even me. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel fear. What I felt was understanding, the kind that comes when you finally see a person clearly without the fog of hope. "I know what you were trying to teach me," I said quietly, my voice barely above the hum of the idling engines. "And I'm done learning your lessons." He lunged forward instinctively, forgetting about the cuffs, forgetting about the deputies, forgetting that the world was no longer bending around his anger, and he was hauled roughly to his feet and placed into the back seat of the patrol car, still shouting, still cursing, still clinging to the only power he had ever known, intimidation. As the door slammed shut, the sound echoed through the trees like a final punctuation mark at the end of a long, brutal sentence. Deputy Faye guided me toward her car, helping me sit while she radioed for medical support, and Arya leaned against me, exhausted, her breath warm against my side. "Mama," she whispered, her voice small but steady despite everything, "is he gone?" I hesitated, not wanting to lie, because Halden's presence didn't vanish just because metal separated him from us. Men like him linger in the mind, in the bruises, in the memories. But tonight, something fundamental had changed. "He's gone for now," I said gently, "and we're going to be okay." She nodded, closing her eyes, trusting me, believing me in a way that made my throat tighten. The deputies worked quietly around us, taking photos, documenting damage, securing evidence, and for the first time in years, I felt like the house was breathing again, the walls no longer holding their breath in anticipation of Halden's next outburst. But even as relief trickled through me, a thin thread of dread pulled tight inside my chest, because I knew Halden, and I knew his family, and I knew this arrest would ignite a fire in them that they would aim at me without hesitation. They wouldn't see a woman escaping abuse. They would see a wife stepping out of line, and they would come. Not tonight, but soon. The sun had barely risen when the knock came, sharp and decisive, the kind of knock that didn't wait for permission because it already believed it had the right to enter. And even though my arm throbbed from the temporary splint the medic had fashioned the night before, and even though exhaustion pressed behind my eyes like a heavy hand, I knew exactly who stood on the other side of that door before I even reached it. Arya was still asleep on the couch, curled beneath a blanket like a small, wounded bird, and I didn't want the sound to wake her, but the knocking continued, louder now, more insistent, and I pressed my good hand against the doorframe to steady myself before opening it. There they stood. Halden's mother, Verna, with her steel-gray hair braided tight against her scalp, and her cold blue eyes taking inventory of everything she saw, and beside her, his younger brother, Jaron, tall and square-jawed, with a face that tried and failed to look neutral. Neither offered a greeting. Neither looked concerned. They looked like people arriving to claim something they believed belonged to them. "Where is he?" Verna demanded, pushing past me before I could answer, her boots thudding across the floor like she owned the house, her gaze slicing through the room until it landed on the spot where Halden usually left his coat. then the area where his boots were supposed to be, then the empty chair he always occupied at the head of the table. "Mama, don't," Jaren muttered, but Verna ignored him, turning toward me with an expression that could peel paint from a wall. "What did you do?" she asked, her tone sharp enough to draw blood. I swallowed hard, keeping my voice level even as my insides coiled tight. "The deputies took him in last night," I said quietly. "He was violent. He broke my arm." Verna's jaw flexed. For a brief moment, something like discomfort flickered across her face, but it vanished quickly, smothered by decades of practiced denial. "Halden, violent?" she scoffed. "He wouldn't hurt you unless you provoked him. You've always had a way of twisting things to make yourself look innocent." The words hit like stones. Not because they were true, but because I'd heard versions of them so many times, buried in Halden's apologies, hidden in the family's sidelong glances at holidays, woven into every warning that told me leaving wasn't just impossible, it was unforgivable. Jaren shifted his weight, rubbing the back of his neck. "Leora," he said softly, more hesitant than his mother, "what exactly happened?" I stared at him, searching his face for something, doubt, belief, anything, before speaking. "He grabbed Arya," I said, each word controlled. "He threw me when I tried to stop him. I hit the table. My arm snapped." Jaren winced. Verna didn't. Instead, she stepped closer, her voice dropping into a low, venomous whisper. "You think you can tear this family apart with your drama? After everything we've done for you, you should be grateful Halden put up with your weakness for as long as he did." Weakness. It echoed inside my skull like a bell rung too close to the ear. That word had kept me silent for years, forced me into shapes that made me smaller and smaller until I barely recognized myself. But something was different now. Maybe it was the pain in my arm, or the adrenaline that still pulsed through me from the night before, or the dawning realization that safety wasn't something given. It was something claimed. "You need to leave," I said, not shouting. Not begging, just stating a truth with the steady finality of a locked door. Verna blinked, stunned for a fraction of a second, before anger colored her cheeks. "Excuse me?" she hissed. "You heard me," I said, my voice growing stronger even though my knees felt weak. "Arya is sleeping. I'm injured. Halden is in custody. This is our home, and you need to leave." Jaren glanced between us, torn, his loyalty stretched thin between blood and conscience. But Verna snapped her fingers at him, a gesture sharp as a whip. "We're not done," she warned me, stepping back toward the door but never taking her eyes off mine. "Halden will be released, and when he is, you will regret doing this to him." She stormed out, her boots striking the porch with a finality that rattled the windows, and Jaren lingered in the doorway, looking at me with something almost like apology. "I know he's got a temper," he whispered, "but you should have talked to us before calling the law." "I tried talking," I said softly. "For years." He swallowed, nodded once, then turned, and followed his mother down the steps, the truck engine roaring to life a moment later, fading slowly down the long dirt road until silence settled back over the house, like a blanket too heavy to lift. I closed the door, leaning my forehead against the wood because the room was suddenly spinning and my breath felt thin. My arm throbbed with every heartbeat, my legs trembled, and the fear that had lived under my skin for years, surged again, whispering that Verna was right, that Halden would come back, that everything I'd done had only delayed the storm, not stopped it. But then I heard it, a small, sleepy voice behind me. "Mama?" Arya stood rubbing her eyes, her hair messy, her cheeks still warm from sleep. She looked so fragile, so trusting, so completely dependent on me to protect her from the world. And the fear quieted. Not gone, but quiet. Because protecting her mattered more than anything Verna could threaten, anything Halden could promise, anything the world could demand. I scooped Arya into my good arm, wincing at the strain but holding her close, breathing in the soft scent of her hair. For a moment the world shrank to just us, the mother and the daughter who had survived the night. But I knew the calm wouldn't last. The deputies had warned me Halden's arraignment would be quick. They'd warned me he'd likely be released without bail. They'd warned me I needed a plan. And as morning light crept across the floorboards of the house where my fear had lived for far too long, I realized that the next step wasn't surviving Halden. It was escaping him. By noon, the sky had turned the color of old tin, flat and heavy, the kind of sky that made the world feel smaller, like even the air was holding its breath. and I kept checking the driveway through the kitchen window because every creak of the house made my chest tighten with the same question. Would today be the day Halden walked back into our lives? The deputies hadn't sugarcoated anything when they called early that morning, their voices clipped but apologetic, as they told me Halden had been arraigned and released pending further investigation, their warning simple: be cautious. He's unpredictable. And though they offered to send a patrol car by the house every few hours, I knew how long the drive was, how stretched thin the county was, how much could happen in the quiet minutes between their visits. Arya sat at the kitchen table coloring quietly, one small hand steadying the paper as she dragged a blue crayon across the page, drawing what looked like a house with a tiny figure beside it. And every so often she glanced toward the door like she, too, felt the heaviness in the air. I wanted to tell her everything would be okay, but I had promised myself never to lie to her again, not even with good intentions, not even if the truth was hard. I stood over the counter sorting through papers the deputy had left: victim advocacy resources, shelter numbers, information about restraining orders, and though the words blurred from exhaustion, one sentence kept echoing in my mind: leaving is the most dangerous time for a victim. I'd always known that. Halden had made sure I did, reminding me in small, quiet ways that walking away wouldn't be walking free, that he'd hunt every step I took. But something inside me had shifted since the night he broke my arm, a place deep in my chest, where fear had lived so long it had carved out its own room, and now that same place was filling with something else: resolve, sharp and unfamiliar, but strong. The phone buzzed on the counter, and I flinched so hard the papers scattered, my pulse surging as I reached for it. The caller ID made my stomach drop: Verna. I let it ring until it stopped, but then a voicemail notification appeared, taunting me like a shadow beneath a door. I didn't want to listen, but I knew I had to. The message played, her voice low and cutting, each word dipped in poison. "Leora, you've got 5 hours," she said coldly. 5 hours to get your story straight before Halden comes home. If you know what's good for you, you'll be here waiting. We're a family, and families fix their own problems. Don't make this worse. The message ended with a click that felt like a knife twisting under my ribcage, and the kitchen seemed to tilt around me, the air thinning as fear clawed upward. My phone buzzed again, this time a text, a single line from an unknown number: "You're not safe. Leave." My breath hitched. I stared at the screen, confused, then typed back, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared, disappearing and reappearing like the sender hesitated. Then the reply came. "Jaren, he doesn't care about cops or consequences. He's coming for you first. Go, now." My knees nearly gave out. Jaren, the same brother who'd looked torn in the doorway, the one who had seemed almost gentle, was warning me. That meant the danger wasn't imagined. It was already in motion. I grabbed Arya from the table, her blue crayon rolling to the floor as she looked at me with wide, questioning eyes. "Mama," she whispered. "We're leaving," I said, keeping my voice calm even though my veins buzzed with pure panic. "Right now." I moved quickly, adrenaline sharpening every movement, grabbing the emergency bag I'd quietly assembled months ago but never dared to use. Clothes, documents, a little cash I'd hidden from Halden, a stuffed rabbit Arya couldn't sleep without. I checked the window again. The driveway was empty, but woodpeckers tapping on the old oak tree sounded too much like footsteps, and a truck engine revving somewhere in the distance made my breath catch. "Mama, you're squeezing me," Arya murmured. I loosened my hold but didn't put her down. We stepped onto the porch, the boards groaning beneath us, and for a moment I looked back at the house, the place that had held my laughter once, then held my fear for far longer. Leaving felt like stepping off a cliff, but staying felt like stepping into fire. I climbed into the truck, buckled Arya in, my fingers trembling so badly I fumbled the latch twice before it clicked. I turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, died. No, please," I whispered, trying again. The second attempt sputtered but caught, the engine coughing into a shaky idle, and relief flooded through me so sharply I could have cried. I shifted into reverse. Gravel crunched beneath the tires. The house pulled farther away. Then another sound. Tires on gravel. Not mine. I froze, my blood icing over as a familiar voice drifted faintly from the trees at the bend of the driveway. "Leora!" It wasn't shouted. It wasn't angry. It was sing-song, taunting, the way someone speaks when they already know they've won. Halden. He was early. Too early. My survival instinct roared. I slammed the truck into drive and pressed the gas so hard the wheels spun, dust exploding behind us as the truck lurched forward. Arya gasped, clutching her rabbit, eyes wide with fear but silent because she sensed how fragile this moment was. The rearview mirror showed movement, a figure breaking through the tree line, stumbling toward the driveway, fury cracking across his face as he realized we were leaving. He broke into a run. I pressed harder on the gas. The truck jostled on the uneven dirt road, weaving slightly, my arm sending shocks of pain so sharp I almost blacked out. But I didn't slow down. I couldn't. The distance grew. Then I saw it. A dark blue SUV parked halfway down the road, blocking the path. My heart slammed so hard it hurt. The engine hummed. The wind shook the trees. And in the mirror, Halden got closer. Too close. The dark blue SUV sat across the narrow dirt road like a steel wall. Its windows tinted so deeply it reflected the trees, instead of revealing whoever waited inside. And my breath hitched so sharply it burned because I knew, with a certainty that tightened my throat, that this wasn't an accident or a coincidence or a random vehicle passing through. This was placed here, deliberately, like a trap someone set while knowing exactly which direction I'd run. Arya whimpered softly beside me, clutching her rabbit to her chest, her big brown eyes darting between the SUV ahead and the rearview mirror where Halden grew larger with every long, vicious stride. My hand slid from the wheel in sweat, my broken arm pulsing molten heat through my body as panic clawed its way up my spine, but something stronger cut through the terror. A cold, fierce clarity that wrapped around me like armor, telling me I couldn't freeze. Not now, not with Arya's safety hanging in the balance. I threw the truck into reverse, intending to back around the bend and cut through the side field if I had to. But the moment I moved the gear shift, the SUV's engine revved loudly, roaring like a challenge. And then the driver's door swung open with startling speed. Out stepped a man I recognized instantly. Verna's cousin, Ruttman, a thick-shouldered brute with a neck like a tree trunk and a jaw that looked carved from rock. A man Halden once bragged could solve problems quietly. He cracked his knuckles as he took a slow step toward the truck, his expression calm in a way that made my stomach twist because only people comfortable with violence ever looked that calm. "Leora!" he shouted, spreading his arms as if this were a casual family meeting and not an ambush. "Let's have a talk." I slammed the truck back into drive, my heart hammering so violently it rattled my ribs. But before I could floor the gas, Ruttman held up one hand, curling his fingers in a smooth, commanding gesture. A gesture I'd seen him use once on a stray dog Halden didn't want around. The dog had stopped running. I wasn't a dog. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and hit the gas. The truck jerked forward, gaining only a few feet before Ruttman sprinted to the driver's side like a charging bull, slamming both palms onto the hood with a force that shook the entire vehicle. Arya screamed. I froze, not because I wanted to, but because instinct demanded it. Because a man that size with intentions that dark could flip the truck if he wanted to. "Get out!" Ruttman barked, leaning his weight on the hood, his face twisted with irritation when I didn't comply. "Don't make this complicated. You know Halden just wants to talk." Behind us, Halden's voice grew louder, closer, panting and furious as he reached the bend in the road. "Leora, stop that damn truck!" Ruttman smirked at the sound, as if victory were already sealed. Something inside me cracked, a quiet, clean break. Not like my arm, but worse, deeper, a snapping of every last thread of fear that had held me captive for years. If I stepped out of the truck, if I surrendered now, if I let them box me in, Arya would never be safe again. I'd never be safe again. And there was no deputy on the way this time. No siren cutting through the night. No chance that someone else would step in and save us. It was me. Just me. I tightened my grip on the wheel, bracing my good shoulder. "Mama," Arya whispered, trembling. "What do we do?" I didn't look at her. Not because I didn't want to, but because if I looked at her now, I'd break. "You hold on tight," I whispered back. "No matter what." And then I pressed the gas. Hard. The truck lurched, pushing against Ruttman's grip, and he stumbled half a step before yelling, "Leora, what the—" I didn't let him finish. I swung the wheel sharply to the right, kicking up a spray of gravel and dirt. The move wasn't smooth or controlled. My broken arm made the wheel wobble, sending white-hot pain through my shoulder. but the sudden jerk knocked Ruttman off balance just long enough for me to swerve past him, the truck scraping against the underbrush on the side of the road. Ruttman cursed loudly, slapping the side of the truck as we shot past. Halden roared behind us, a sound so full of rage it didn't sound entirely human. The truck bounced violently as we veered onto the edge of the ditch, jostling everything inside. But I kept my foot down, kept my eyes ahead, kept my mind locked on one goal: escape. "Hold on, baby," I whispered, as Arya clung to her seat. The SUV grew smaller in the mirror. Ruttman grew smaller. Halden tripped on the gravel as he tried to chase us, falling to his knees before scrambling up with wild desperation. And for a fleeting moment, I allowed myself to believe we might actually make it. Then the engine sputtered, twice, a third time, and smoke, thin, gray, and sickly, began to curl out from under the hood. "No," I breathed, slapping the dashboard with my good hand. "Not now, please." But the truck shuddered violently, coughed a final breath, and died right there in the middle of the narrow pass between the tall pines. Silence crashed down like a hammer. Arya whimpered. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. Footsteps thundered behind us. Halden's enraged shout slicing through the trees. Ruttman's more controlled stride close behind. They were coming, and the truck was dead. I unbuckled Arya so fast my fingers fumbled, grabbed her under my arm, and threw open the door. "Don't look back," I whispered, breath shaking. "Just stay with me." We ran. Or rather, I ran, and she clung to me, my legs pounding against the uneven earth as branches slapped my face and the forest swallowed us whole. Halden's voice followed immediately, cracking with fury. "Leora, you think you can run from me? You think you can take my daughter?" The word pierced something deep inside me like a blade. I didn't look back. I kept running until my lungs burned and my vision blurred and my broken arm screamed with every jarring step. But then, a voice ahead, not Halden's. Not Ruttman's, a man's voice. Firm, urgent. "Leora, this way!" I skidded to a stop as a figure emerged from behind a thick cedar tree. Deputy Lawrence, his hand outstretched, his patrol car lights flickering faintly through the trees. He looked at me, at the fear, at Arya's trembling body, at my broken arm, and something steeled in his expression. "You're safe now," he said. "I've got you." Behind us, branches snapped under heavy footsteps. Halden was closing in, and Lawrence reached for his radio. "Officers, I've located them. Send backup now." The forest around us was alive with shadows, moonlight slanting through the pine branches, painting jagged lines across the dirt and leaves. But inside the patrol car, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: calm. Arya's small hand held mine, trembling but trusting, and her rabbit sat in her lap. A ragged reminder that childhood could survive even the worst nights. Deputy Lawrence drove slowly at first, scanning every curve in the road, but then he hit the siren, and the sound cracked through the night like lightning, announcing to anyone foolish enough to pursue that they had no chance. I closed my eyes, letting the vibrations of the car rumble through my broken arm, letting the adrenaline drain slowly from my body. Somewhere behind us, Halden cursed, his voice thick with fury, then silence. I didn't need to look in the rearview mirror to know he and Ruttman had stumbled back into the shadows, realizing too late that we weren't alone, that the world didn't revolve around them, that justice didn't always sleep. When we reached the clearing where Lawrence had called for backup, headlights cut through the darkness like blades, revealing men and women in uniforms moving swiftly, systematically closing every exit. I breathed in the night air, sharp and cold, and for the first time allowed the weight of everything. The bruises, the fear, the months of being trapped in a home that had become a cage, the betrayal of my daughter, the crushing helplessness of my broken arm, to press down and be acknowledged. "You did the right thing," Lawrence said quietly, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror. "You didn't wait. You didn't negotiate with monsters. You ran. You survived." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I wanted to cry, but the tears were sharp and bitter, not from relief, but from the raw clarity of truth. Arya leaned against my shoulder, whispering, "Mama, we're okay now." Her voice was small, fragile, a thread of sound in the storm that had been our lives. I held her tighter, feeling the steady beat of her heart, a reminder that life, fragile as it was, still persisted. "We're okay," I said firmly, the words steady, even as my arm throbbed with fire. By the time we reached the station, the scene had been secured. Halden was in cuffs, Ruttman shadowed and quiet, their previous confidence dissolved into bitter panic. My daughter, the one who had once whispered that her husband had taught me a lesson, would be the first to realize that lessons she thought she was delivering had already been delivered to the wrong person. I stepped out of the car, my broken arm held close, and for a moment I let the weight of the night fall onto me like a heavy blanket. Lawrence guided Aria to a bench nearby, and she sat, staring at the fluorescent lights reflecting off the polished floor, small and wide-eyed. "Mama," she whispered again. This time the fear in her voice was laced with a dawning comprehension, the realization that our lives had been teetering on the edge of something irreversible, and that escape didn't come from anyone but the person who refused to be broken. I looked at her and smiled, not a bright, carefree smile, but one of endurance, survival, and quiet victory. I walked toward the holding area where Halden had been placed, seeing him for the first time in handcuffs, face pale, eyes wide with disbelief and humiliation. All the bluster, all the threats, all the moments he had imagined he was in control. Gone. He looked at me, a pleading mix of shock and disbelief. "You think this is the end?" he rasped. "It's just the beginning," I said calmly, voice carrying the sharp, cutting precision of someone who had been pushed to the limit and returned stronger. The beginning of accountability, the beginning of you realizing that no one is untouchable, the beginning of your reckoning. And then finally, I turned to Aria. Her eyes, wide and teary, held a question I had not yet answered. "Mama," she said, voice breaking, Did I do something wrong? Was it my fault?" I shook my head, kneeling beside her, keeping my broken arm close to my chest. "No, my darling, you did nothing wrong. You followed your instincts. You survived. You trusted me. That is all anyone could ask of you." She clung to me, and I let her, letting the small warmth of her body remind me that family was not only about blood, but about protection, love, and the courage to make impossible choices. In that moment, all the years of fear, betrayal, and manipulation seemed to condense into a single, crystallized truth. Survival was an act of love, and love demanded sometimes unimaginable strength. Officers escorted Halden and Ruttman from the station. Aria and I were guided to a small room where I could sit, and Lawrence brought us tea, hot and strong, the steam curling like a promise of calm. "You did everything right tonight," he said softly, sitting across from me. "Most people freeze. Most people panic. You acted with precision, with courage. Even with your arm, broken as it is, you were the one who made the difference." I let the words sink in, feeling their weight, because it wasn't just about what happened tonight. It was about every time I had been underestimated. Every time someone assumed my age, my injury, my quiet nature meant weakness. No more. Tonight we were alive, intact and in control. The next hours passed in quiet preparation. I spoke with Aria about what had happened, explaining the dangers, the importance of truth, and the strength in standing firm even when the world seems against you. She listened, rapt and silent, absorbing the gravity of the night, but also a glimmer of hope. By the time we left the station for the small, safe apartment Lawrence had arranged for us temporarily, the city skyline shimmered in the distance, golden and indifferent, yet somehow welcoming, a reminder that life continued, and we would continue too. Aria held my hand, no longer trembling but steady, and I felt a profound sense of closure. Halden's reign of terror was over. His lessons, delivered to me through pain and fear, had backfired. He had not taught me a lesson. I had taught myself and Aria the ultimate lesson of survival, courage, and resilience. As we stepped into the apartment, I looked out at the city lights through the large window, feeling for the first time in years a sense of quiet triumph. "Mama," Aria said, turning to me. I smiled gently, brushing her hair back. "Yes, my darling? We're safe." "Really safe?" I nodded, my broken arm throbbing but my spirit unbroken. "Yes, safe and free, forever." And in that moment, in the soft glow of the city lights, I realized that life had returned not just to us, but to the truth, to dignity, and to the unshakable bond between a mother and her child. The storm had passed, justice had been served, and the future, uncertain, untested but ours, awaited like a wide, open sky. Tick-tock, tick-tock, the clock in the corner of the room measured each second, steady and relentless. And I, Leora, a mother who had endured, survived, and emerged victorious, let the weight of the past fall away. Tonight we were alive, whole, and ready to live again. The lesson had been taught, but not the one Halden expected. It had been the lesson of courage, resilience, and the invincible power of a mother's love. And as Arya rested her head on my shoulder, eyes heavy with sleep but mind awake with understanding, I knew that nothing, not betrayal, not fear, not cruelty, could ever take that from us again. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.